My parents sat me down at Sunday lunch to demand I cover my brother's living expenses after he was fired for negligence. They preached family loyalty, unaware I had already sold my house and accepted a job 3,000 miles away, leaving them with absolutely nothing. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had started somewhere between the interstate off-ramp and the driveway of my parents' house. It wasn't just a headache. It was a rhythmic thumping behind my left eye, a physical manifestation of the dread I felt every single Sunday. I sat in my car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. I was 34 years old, a senior logistics manager for a national shipping firm, and yet, parking in this driveway reduced me to a trembling, anxious child. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked pale. It had been 3 weeks since the doctor told me my cortisol levels were catastrophic and 2 weeks since I had battled through a nasty bout of bronchitis that still left me winded if I moved too fast. I was physically depleted, operating on caffeine and sheer willpower. I needed rest. I needed silence. What I didn't need was Sunday lunch with the family. "Pull it together, Mabel," I whispered to myself, my voice raspy. 2 hours. Eat the roast, nod at Dad's rants, ignore Jason, and leave. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of impending rain and the heavy, cloying scent of my mother's pot roast wafting from the kitchen window. That smell, usually associated with comfort, just made my stomach turn. When I opened the front door, the volume of the television hit me like a physical blow. A football game was blaring at maximum volume. "Mabel, is that you?" My mother's voice cut through the noise, shrill and demanding. "It's me, Mom," I called out, hanging my coat on the rack. I noticed Jason's leather jacket, an exorbitant purchase he definitely couldn't afford, slung carelessly over the banister. It slipped as I walked by, falling to the floor. I left it there. I walked into the living room. My father, Robert, was reclined in his armchair, a beer already in hand despite it being barely noon. He didn't look up. My brother, Jason, was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, looking the picture of relaxation. "Hey, nice of you to show up," Jason said without looking away from his screen. "We're starving." "I'm on time, Jason. Exactly noon," I replied, fighting the urge to cough. My chest felt tight. "You look like hell," my father grunted, finally glancing over. "Work running you ragged again? You need to learn to say no to overtime. Family time is more important." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. "I'm recovering from bronchitis, Dad. I told you that on the phone." "You sound fine," Jason muttered. "Lunch is ready." Linda, my mother, bustled into the room, wiping her hands on a floral apron. Her eyes scanned me, critical and sharp. "Mabel, fix your hair. You look like you just rolled out of bed. And set the table. Jason, go wash up." "Why do I have to set the table?" I asked, though I was already moving toward the dining room. It was muscle memory. "Because your brother is tired. He's had a hard week," Mom said, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial, pitying tone she reserved exclusively for her golden boy. I paused, holding a stack of plates. "A hard week? He works 20 hours a week at the electronics store." "Not anymore," she said, her lips thinning into a straight line. "We'll discuss it at the table. Sit." The command was absolute. I sat. My stomach churned, and it wasn't from hunger. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with a specific kind of static that always preceded a demand. I looked at the three of them, my father staring at his plate, my mother fidgeting with her napkin, and Jason looking smugly defiant. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have some news," Mom began, placing a hand over Jason's on the tablecloth. "Unfortunate news. Your brother. He was let go from his position yesterday." "Fired," I corrected automatically. "You don't get let go from a retail shift for no reason." It was a misunderstanding, Jason snapped, his face flushing red. Manager had it out for me, said I was stealing time just because I took a few extra breaks. It's total BS. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, Dad interrupted, slamming his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. The point is, he's out of work, and the economy is garbage. It's going to take him time to find something worthy of his talents. Okay, I said slowly, sensing the trap close. Ing around me. So, he looks for a new job. Why is this a family meeting? Mom took a deep breath. She looked at Dad, then at Jason, and finally fixed her eyes on me. Jason has expenses, Mabel. His rent, his car payment, his credit cards. He can't have a gap in payments, or it will ruin his credit score. And, I asked, my heart rate spiking. And, Mom continued, her voice hardening, we've looked at our retirement budget, and we simply cannot stretch it any further. We've helped him as much as we can. She paused, and the silence stretched out, suffocating. So, she finished, a smile that didn't reach her eyes plastering onto her face, we decided that you will step in. You'll be covering his bills for a while, just until he gets back on his feet. The betrayal hit me harder than the diagnosis I'd received 2 weeks ago. It wasn't just a request, it was a mandate. They hadn't asked me, they had decided for me. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly sounded like a sledgehammer against my skull. Excuse me, I choked out, setting my fork down with a clatter. I think I misunderstood. You want me to do what? Pay his bills, Mabel. Don't be dramatic, Dad said, cutting into his roast beef as if he hadn't just demanded I hemorrhage thousands of dollars. It's not forever, just rent, car, insurance. Maybe a little spending money so he doesn't look destitute. Spending money? I repeated, my voice rising an octave. I am recovering from a major illness. I have my own mortgage. I have medical bills coming in from the lung specialist, and you want me to pay for his. I gestured wildly at Jason, who was busy piling potatoes onto his plate, looking entirely unbothered. For his luxury apartment downtown, his sports car lease. It's a terrifying market out there, Jason said through a mouthful of food. I can't lose the apartment, Mabel. It's close to all the networking spots. If I move back here, my social life dies, and my brand relies on image. Your brand? I laughed, a harsh, dry sound that hurt my throat. Jason, you have 300 followers on Instagram. You don't have a brand, you have a hobby. Hey, Mom snapped. Be supportive, he is trying to build something. I am not doing it, I said, shaking my head. I am not paying his rent. I can't afford it, and even if I could, I wouldn't. He is 29 years old. We aren't asking, Dad grumbled, pointing his fork at me. Family helps family, no complaints. We paid for your braces. We helped you with your down payment 10 years ago. I paid you back for that down payment within 2 years, I countered, my hands trembling under the table. With interest. You charged me interest, Dad. Remember? You said it was a lesson in fiscal responsibility. Where is Jason's lesson? This is different, Mom insisted, waving her hand dismissively. Jason is sensitive, he needs a runway, and look at you, you're a manager. You drive that nice SUV, you take vacations. I haven't taken a vacation in 4 years, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I work 60-hour weeks, that's why I have money, because I work for it. And you're lucky to have that job, Dad said. So you share the luck. We did the math. If you cut back on your $401k contribution and maybe stop eating out, you can cover Jason's overhead easily. It's about $2,000 a month. $2,000. They had done the math. They had actually sat down, calculated my brother's debt, estimated my income, and allocated my resources without my consent. I looked at Jason. He was watching me with a look of expectancy, not gratitude. He expected this. He felt entitled to my labor. You really sat down and planned my budget for me? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. We're just trying to solve a problem, Mom said, pouring gravy over her meat. We knew you'd be difficult, but we expected you to do the right thing eventually. We're a team, Mabel. A team. I looked down at my coffee cup. It was black, dark, and bitter, just the way I liked it. My hand moved to the handle. I felt the warmth of the ceramic against my cold fingers. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was the same Mabel who sought their approval, who would work herself into the hospital just to hear a single good job that never came. They thought I was trapped in this town, tethered to them by guilt and obligation. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I managed supply chains for a living. I dealt in logistics, in timelines, and in contingencies. And I had been planning a contingency for 6 months. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The liquid was scalding, but I didn't flinch. I let the burn ground me. In my purse, sitting on the floor by my feet, was a folded envelope. Inside that envelope was a signed closing disclosure for my house, and a one-way plane ticket to Seattle. They wanted my money. They wanted my stability to prop up their house of cards. I lowered the cup. "So," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me, "you've decided I'm the safety net." "It's the only logical choice," Dad said, finally looking satisfied that I appeared to be capitulating. "Right," I whispered. To understand why this moment was so shattering, you have to understand the decade of servitude that led up to it. I have been the backup plan since I was 16. When Jason crashed his first car, a hand-me-down from Dad, I was the one who drove him to school every day for a year, waking up an hour early to detour. When he failed 2 semesters of community college, I was the one who sat up with him, rewriting his essays and making flashcards, only for him to drop out anyway because the professors were biased. I missed my own college graduation party because Jason had been arrested for underage drinking, and I had to go to the station with Dad to bail him out so Mom wouldn't find out and get upset. I had built my life on the architecture of sacrifice. I chose a high-paying major, supply chain management, not because I loved it, but because I knew I needed to be solvent. I needed to be the rock. And Jason was the kite. He fluttered from interest to interest, DJing, personal training, crypto investing, always tethered to the ground by the strings Mom and Dad held and the money I provided. But today, looking at Jason across the table, I saw something I hadn't let myself see before. I saw the antagonist of my life story. He wasn't just a screw-up. He was malicious in his incompetence. He was wearing a watch that I knew cost $600. His haircut was a fresh $60 fade. He smelled of expensive cologne. He looked polished, healthy, and vibrant. Meanwhile, I was sitting there in a 10-year-old cardigan, hiding the dark circles under my eyes with concealer, suppressing a cough that rattled my ribs. "So, what's the plan, Jace?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "If I pay your rent, what do you do all day?" Jason shrugged, cutting a piece of fat off his meat. "I'm going to focus on content creation. Full-time. I need to upgrade my camera gear, actually. I was hoping, since you're helping out, maybe you could put a new lens on your credit card? I can pay you back when the sponsorships start rolling in." "A lens," I repeated. "How much is that?" "Like $1,200, but it's an investment, Mabel. You have to spend money to make money." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. See, he has a business plan, he just needs capital." Linda, my mother, was a retired school administrator. She knew how the world worked. She knew what a resume gap looked like, but when it came to Jason, she was willfully blind. She fed off his dependence. As long as he needed her, and by extension me, she had a purpose. She was the architect of his helplessness. "And Dad," I turned to Robert, "you agree with this? You think I should finance a camera lens while I'm paying off hospital bills?" Robert wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I think you should support your brother's dreams. You have a steady paycheck. He has potential. Don't be jealous, Mabel. It's ugly." Jealous. That was the word that snapped the final tether. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource, a silo of grain to be raided whenever the golden child was hungry. They saw my hard work not as a virtue, but as a reservoir for Jason's leisure. I looked at Jason again. He smirked. It was a tiny, fleeting thing, but I saw it. He knew he had won. He knew Mom and Dad would batter me until I gave in. He had probably coached them on what to say before I arrived. He thinks he's the main character, I thought, a cold clarity washing over me. He thinks I'm just the NPC shopkeeper here to give him supplies for his quest. I took another breath. The air in the room felt stale, recycled. I see, I said. So the expectation is set. $2,000 a month, plus equipment costs. It's not that much for you, Jason said casually. You make what, 80 grand? 110, Dad corrected him. She got that raise last year. They knew my salary. Of course they did. Right, Jason smiled. 110, you're rich, May, don't be stingy. I felt the envelope in my purse, virtually vibrating against my leg. Well, I said, sitting up straighter. I suppose we should talk about logistics then. Good, Mom exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. I knew you'd be reasonable. I'll get the dessert. I made apple pie. She stood up, triumphant. She thought the negotiation was over. She thought she had extracted the resource. I waited until she was in the kitchen doorway. Actually, Mom, wait, I said. She turned, smiling. Yes, dear. I have a counter-proposal, I said. Jason rolled his eyes. Oh my God, here come the conditions. Just Venmo me the money, Mabel. No conditions, I said, my voice clear and strong. Just a slight change in the housing situation. What do you mean? Dad asked, frowning. Well, I said, looking at Jason dead in the eyes. You said family helps family, and you said we need to cut costs, so I figured out a way to save everyone a lot of money. Great, Jason said. What is it? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and delivered the first strike. Great, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, gravy-scented air like a scalpel. Then he can move into your house because I'm selling mine, and you're going to need the extra room. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in the dining room was the ticking of the grandfather clock, and the distant, muffled roar of the football crowd from the TV in the other room. Jason was the first to react. He blinked, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. What? You heard me, I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was the adrenaline. I'm selling my house. Actually, that's not accurate. I sold my house. The closing documents were signed yesterday via DocuSign. The new owners take possession in 14 days. You sold the house? Mom's voice was a tremulous whisper, as if I had just confessed to murder. But that's a family asset. We helped you pick it out. You helped me look at 3 Zillow links, Mom. I paid the down payment. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the new roof last year when you said you couldn't spare the handyman, I reminded her. But where are you going to live? Dad demanded, his face turning a blotchy shade of purple. You can't just sell a house without consulting your father. That is fiscal irresponsibility. I'm moving to Seattle, I dropped the second bomb. I accepted a transfer to the corporate headquarters, Senior Director of Logistics. It comes with a significant raise and a relocation package. I fly out next Tuesday. Seattle, Jason slammed his fork down. That's across the country. You can't move to Seattle. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious to hear his logic. Because I need help here, he shouted, his facade of cool detachment shattering instantly. How are you supposed to pay my rent if you're in Washington? I'm not paying your rent, Jason. That's the point, I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. I'm not paying your rent, I'm not buying your camera lens, and I'm not damaging my credit score to fix yours. Sit down, Dad roared. He slammed his hand on the table again, but this time I didn't flinch. You are abandoning this family in a time of crisis. Your brother is vulnerable, and you're just running away. I'm not running away, Dad. I'm advancing my career, I said. And frankly, after the ambush you just tried to pull, I'm glad I'm leaving. You didn't ask me for help. You demanded a tithe. We are your parents, Mom wailed, bursting into tears. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. The sudden waterworks, the hand clutching the chest. We raised you, we gave you everything, and now, when we need just a little bit of help. A little bit, I grabbed my purse from the floor. You asked for $2,000 a month indefinitely. That's a mortgage. That's a second life. You have the money now. Jason pointed a finger at me, his eyes lighting up with a greedy realization. You sold the house, you have all that equity. You're sitting on, what, $100,000? You can easily afford to set me up for a year. It's the least you can do. There it was, the pivot. They didn't care that I was leaving, they cared about the equity check. The equity, I said, clutching my purse strap tighter, is going directly into a bridge loan for my new apartment in Seattle and a blind trust I've set up for my retirement. It is not liquid. And even if it were, you wouldn't see a dime. You selfish, ungrateful little. Dad started to rise from his chair. Don't, I warned him, my voice dropping. Do not finish that sentence. I'm leaving, enjoy the pie. I turned and walked out. I could hear them shouting behind me, Mom crying, Dad yelling about respect, Jason cursing, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my coat, opened the front door, and stepped out into the rain. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had done it. I had actually said no. But as I keyed the ignition and backed out of the driveway, seeing Jason watching me from the living room window with a look of pure venom, I knew it wasn't over. They wouldn't let a paycheck like me walk away that easily. I drove 2 blocks down and pulled into a gas station parking lot. I needed to think. My hands were trembling as I pulled out my phone. Something about the way Jason had panicked, not just about the money, but about the timing, didn't sit right. And the way Mom had said, we can't stretch our budget any further. My parents had a paid-off house and 2 pensions. They shouldn't be broke. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Hello, a female voice answered. Sarah, it's Mabel from high school. Mabel, oh my God, hi, how are you? I'm hanging in there, I lied. Look, this is going to sound weird, but you're still the assistant manager at the electronics store at the mall, right? Yeah, sadly, she laughed. Lifer, I guess. My brother, Jason, he told us he was let go yesterday. He said it was a misunderstanding about break times. The line went silent. The silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Sarah. Mabel, she said, her tone completely different, guarded. I can't really discuss HR stuff, you know that. I know, I pressed. But my parents are trying to make me pay his bills because they think he was wrongfully terminated. They think he's a victim. I just need to know, should I be helping him? Don't, she whispered. Mabel, seriously, do not give him money. Was it stealing? I asked, the dread pooling in my stomach. I can't say, she said, but her voice was tight. But let's just say, police were involved, but the store chose not to press charges if the damages were repaid immediately. He has 48 hours, Mabel, or they file the report. I closed my eyes. How much, Sarah? 5,000, she said. High-end consoles and games. He was walking out the back door with them. I hung up. It wasn't rent. It was restitution. My parents weren't asking me to support his lifestyle. They were trying to trick me into paying his ransom to keep him out of jail. And they hadn't told me. The realization burned through me as I drove back to my house. It was a detached, 3-bedroom colonial that I had spent the last 7 years renovating. It was my sanctuary. But now, seeing the sold sign in the yard with the under contract rider on top, it felt like a battlefield I was retreating from. I spent the next 2 days in a frenzy of packing. I hired professional movers, but there was still so much to organize. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Mom or Dad, I ignored it. Mom, we need to talk. You are breaking your father's heart. Dad, pick up the phone. We need to discuss the equity check. Jason, don't be a bitch, May. I need that cash by Tuesday. Tuesday, the deadline Sarah had mentioned. On Tuesday evening, I was in my living room taping up a box of books. The house echoed, the rugs were gone, the curtains were down. It was hollow. A car door slammed outside, then another. I stood up, dusting my hands on my jeans. I walked to the window and saw my parents. Sedan and Jason's flashy red coupe parked haphazardly in my driveway, blocking my SUV. They marched up the walk like a battalion. Dad was leading, his face set in a grim line. Mom was trailing behind, clutching her purse. Jason looked frantic, his eyes darting around. They didn't knock. Dad tried the handle, found it locked, and began pounding on the door. "Mabel, open this door. We know you're in there." I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. "Trespassing?" Dad scoffed, pushing past me before I could stop him. "This is my daughter's house. I'm not trespassing." They filed into the living room and stopped dead. The sight of the empty room, the stacks of boxes, and the bare walls seemed to finally make it real for them. "You're really doing it," Mom whispered, looking around the empty space. "You're really destroying this family." "I'm moving, Mom. People do it every day," I said, leaning against a stack of boxes marked kitchen. "Now, why are you here? I have a flight at 6:00 a.m. tomorrow." "You know why we're here," Jason snapped. He was pacing back and forth, his shoes squeaking on the hardwood. "The money, Mabel. The equity check cleared today. We know it did." Dad called the bank and asked. You impersonated me to check my closing status." I looked at Dad, horrified. "I just asked a few questions," Dad grumbled, looking away. "I needed to know if you were lying. You have the money. We need $15,000. "15?" I raised an eyebrow. Sunday it was $2,000 a month. Now it's a lump sum of 15. "Inflation," Jason sneered. "Just write the check, Mabel, or transfer it. Then you can go to your rain-soaked little paradise." "Is that what the 5,000 is for?" I asked quietly. "The consoles." The room went dead silent. Jason froze mid-pace. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jason stammered, but his face had gone pale. "I spoke to Sarah," I said, watching them closely. "She told me about the misunderstanding. You were stealing inventory, Jason, $5,000 worth, and the store gave you 48 hours to pay it back or they go to the police." "That lying little," Jason hissed. So, I turned to my parents. You knew he committed a felony. And you sat at lunch on Sunday, looked me in the eye, and told me he was let go unfairly. You tried to guilt me into paying his legal ransom without telling me what it was." "We were protecting him," Mom cried out, stepping forward to grab my arm. I pulled away. "He made a mistake, Mabel. He's young. If he gets a record, his life is over. He won't be able to get a decent job." "He already can't get a decent job because he's lazy and entitled," I shouted, my voice finally cracking. "And instead of letting him face the consequences, you tried to steal my money to cover up his crime." "It's family money," Dad yelled. "You have more than you need. Why do you want to see your brother in jail? What kind of sister are you?" "The kind who is done being the ATM," I said, pointing at the door. "Get out." "No," Jason said, stepping toward me. His face was twisted into something ugly. "Not until you give me the money. I'm not going to jail because you're being a greedy hoarder. You owe me this. You've always had it easy. Perfect grades, perfect job, you owe me." "I owe you nothing," I yelled back. "I worked for everything I have. While you were partying, I was studying. While you were buying cars you couldn't afford, I was saving." "Give him the money, Mabel," Dad commanded, stepping between us, his physical presence looming over me. "I am your father, and I am telling you to write the check. Now." "And if I don't," I challenged him. "Then you are no daughter of mine," he spat, "and don't expect to ever come back here." "That," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone, "is the best offer you've made all day." I held up the phone. The screen was recording. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Or I send this recording to the police myself. And then Jason goes to jail for extortion on top of the theft. Jason flinched. Dad looked at the phone, then at me, his eyes filled with a cold, hard hatred I had never seen before. "You're bluffing," Jason said, but his voice wavered. "Try me," I said. "I have nothing left to lose here. You've made sure of that." They left, but not before Dad kicked a box of my dishes on his way out, sending the sound of shattering porcelain echoing through the empty house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, phone in hand, waiting for the police to show up or for them to come back with a brick. But the night remained quiet. The next morning, I boarded my flight to Seattle. As the plane lifted off, watching the gray grid of my hometown disappear beneath the clouds, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt a deep, sick dread. I knew them. I knew that embarrassment was the one thing that fueled them more than money. I had humiliated them. They wouldn't just let it go. I was right. 2 weeks later, I was settling into my new apartment in Seattle. It was a beautiful glass-walled unit overlooking the Sound. I was starting to breathe again. Then the email came. It was from the HR department at my company. Subject, urgent, complaint regarding professional conduct. My stomach dropped. I opened it. It was a notification that a concerned family member had contacted the company claiming that I had embezzled funds from a family trust and fled the state to avoid prosecution. "Jason." I immediately called the HR director, explaining the situation, offering to provide bank statements, legal documents, and the police report I had filed regarding the harassment. Because my company knew me, and because Jason's email was written in frantic, semi-illiterate prose, they believed me. But the humiliation of having my personal drama bleed into my professional life was excruciating. But it didn't stop there. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Mabel?" a stern voice asked. "Yes." "This is Officer Miller from the hometown police department. We're conducting a welfare check on a Robert and Linda last name." "My parents," I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. "What happened?" "Well, ma'am, your mother called 911 claiming your father had a heart attack brought on by extreme stress caused by financial abandonment. She claimed you hold the power of attorney and have frozen their assets." I nearly dropped the phone. They were weaponizing the police. They were trying to drag me back by force. "Officer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I do not have power of attorney. I live in Washington State. My parents are fully competent adults. This is a harassment tactic because I refuse to pay my brother's legal fees for a theft charge." There was a pause. "I see," the officer said, his tone shifting. "We are at the residence now. Your father appears. Well, he is claiming chest pains, but his vitals are stable. He is demanding we call you." "Tell him I'm not coming," I sigh. Tears of frustration stinging my eyes. "And officer, please check their records. My brother, Jason, is likely there. He has an outstanding issue with the electronics store at the mall." I hung up and sat there, trembling. They were going nuclear. They were willing to fake a medical emergency and file false police reports just to get me back in their grasp. I needed to end this, not just run away, but end it. I opened my laptop and began to dig. I had been a supply chain manager for 10 years. I knew how to track things. I knew how to find the weak link. I pulled up public records. I paid for a comprehensive background check on my parents, something I should have done years ago. What I found made the room spin. My parents weren't just tight on budget, they were destitute. 3 years ago, they had taken out a massive home equity line of credit. The stated purpose? Home improvements. But looking at the dates, the withdrawals coincided perfectly with Jason's business ventures. $20,000 for a crypto mining rig that never materialized. $15,000 for a car lease down payment. $10,000 for a brand consultation. They had drained their home's equity to fund Jason's delusions. They were underwater. If they didn't make payments soon, the bank would foreclose. That's why they needed my house money. It wasn't just for Jason's theft charge, it was to save their house. They were weeks away from losing everything, and they had pinned all their hopes on hijacking my life savings. And then I saw the kicker. A notarized document filed with the county clerk 6 months ago, a quitclaim deed. My parents had signed over the title of their house to Jason. They had given him the house to protect it from creditors, likely on some shady advice he found online. But Jason, being Jason, had already leveraged the deed. There was a lien on the property from a private lending company, a loan shark, essentially. Jason had mortgaged the house out from under them without them knowing. I sat back, staring at the screen. They were trying to destroy me to save a house that they didn't even own anymore. Jason had already stolen it. I had the smoking gun. I had the proof that would shatter their entire reality. I picked up my phone and looked at the calendar. My cousin's wedding was this weekend, back in my hometown. I hadn't planned on going, but now I wouldn't miss it for the world. The wedding was held at a vineyard estate about 30 minutes outside of town. It was exactly the kind of venue my cousin, Jessica, had always dreamed of: rustic chic, expensive wine, and a guest list that included half the town. I arrived late by design. I wore a dress I had bought in Seattle, a sharp, emerald green silk that made me feel like armor. I looked successful. I looked unbothered. I looked like someone who hadn't spent the last week dodging false police reports. I saw them immediately. My parents and Jason were seated at a table near the back. They looked terrible. Dad was gray-faced and slumped. Mom looked like she hadn't slept in days. Jason, however, was in a tuxedo that I knew he hadn't paid for, laughing loudly with a group of bridesmaids, holding a glass of champagne. He was drinking champagne while his parents sat there, drowning in the debt he created. I made my way through the reception, greeting relatives who looked at me with varying degrees of curiosity. The rumors must have started. Mabel abandoned them. Mabel stole their money. I held my head high. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and moved toward the terrace. I knew they would follow. It took less than 5 minutes. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here," Dad's voice grated behind me. I turned. They were all there, the unholy trinity. Dad looked furious, his hands clenched into fists. Mom looked desperate, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. Jason brought up the rear, looking annoyed that his party time was interrupted. "It's Jessica's wedding, Dad. I was invited," I said calmly. "After what you did to us," Mom hissed, stepping close, her perfume cloying and sweet. "The police told us everything, Mabel. They told us you refused to come. You left your father to die." I spoke to the officer, Mom. Dad's vitals were stable. And considering you're standing here yelling at me, I assume he made a miraculous recovery, I replied, taking a sip of my water. "You are cold," Dad spat. "You are a cold, heartless woman. But it ends today. You are going to write us a check for $20,000, right now. Or I am going to walk up to that microphone during the toasts and tell everyone in this room exactly what you are." "20,000, I asked. "The price keeps going up. Is that to cover the interest on the loan shark note?" Jason froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a shutter closing. "What?" Dad frowned, looking between me and Jason. "What loan shark?" "Oh, Jason didn't tell you?" I asked, feigning surprise. I set my glass down on a high-top table and opened my clutch. I pulled out the folded papers I had printed at the hotel business center that morning. "I did some digging," I said, my voice projecting just enough to draw the attention of the table nearest to us. "Because I couldn't understand why you were so desperate. I knew Jason stole the consoles. I knew about the $5,000 restitution. But $20,000? That seemed high." I handed the first document to my father. "Do you recognize this, Dad?" He squinted at the paper. It's a deed, a quitclaim deed." "Look at the signature," I instructed. He looked. It's mine and Linda S." "You signed that 6 months ago," I said. Jason told you it was a homestead protection form to lower your property taxes, didn't he? Mom gasped. Yes, he said. He said the city was raising rates. He lied, I said, locking eyes with Jason, who was now looking for an exit. He had you sign the house over to him, sole ownership. You don't own your home, Dad. Jason does. That's a lie, Jason shouted, but his voice cracked. She's lying, she forged it. And this, I handed Dad the second document, is a lien filed against the property 3 weeks ago by a private lender known for high-risk, high-interest loans. Jason took out a $50,000 loan against the house. $50,000? Mom whispered, her knees buckling. She grabbed the edge of the table to hold herself up. Where is the money, Jason? I asked, stepping toward him. Did you spend it on the brand, or did you gamble it away? Because it's gone. And now, since you haven't made a payment, they are initiating foreclosure proceedings. I saw the notice of default filed yesterday. Foreclosure? Dad's voice was a low rumble like an approaching earthquake. He looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with horror. Jason, tell me she's lying. It's not what it looks like. Jason stammered, backing away, his hands up in a defensive posture. I had a sure thing, an investment. It was going to triple. I was going to pay off the house and buy you guys a boat. The market crashed. You gambled our house? Mom screamed. It wasn't a cry, it was a shriek of pure, agonizing betrayal. The sound stopped the music. The entire wedding reception went silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the terrace. Mom, keep it down, Jason hissed, looking around frantically. You stole our house, Dad roared, the paper crumpling in his fist. We are homeless because of you. I was trying to help, Jason yelled back, his narcissism flaring up in a final, desperate defense. If Mabel had just given me the money, I could have made the payments. This is her fault. She's the one with the money, she's the selfish one. I am the one, I said, my voice ringing out in the silence, who offered you a place to live. I am the one who offered to let you move into their house. But you couldn't do that, could you, Jason? Because you knew there was no house left to move into. I turned to my parents. They looked broken, aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The realization was washing over them every time they had chosen him, every time they had taken money from me to give to him, every excuse they had made. They had financed their own destruction. You wanted me to cover his bills, I said softly to my mother. You wanted my equity check, not to help him get back on his feet, but to pay off the debt he created by stealing your home. You were going to drain me dry to cover his crimes. We didn't know, Mom sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Mabel, please, we didn't know. You should have known, I said. You should have looked, but you never look at Jason. You only look at me when you need something. Mabel, Dad stepped forward, his hand reaching out, trembling. Mabel, what do we do? We have nowhere to go, you have to help us. Please, we can come to Seattle, just for a while. The audacity was breathtaking. Even in the face of absolute ruin, their instinct was to pivot to the next host. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had told me, family helps family, while robbing me of my childhood. I looked at the man who had called the police on me to force me to pay for a thief. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mabel, Mom whispered. I sold my house, Dad. I moved. I started a new life. And in that life, I don't negotiate with terrorists, and I don't harbor thieves. I turned to Jason. The police are on their way, by the way, I said casually. Not for the house, that's a civil matter, but for the electronics store. I told Sarah where you'd be. She said the 48-hour window expired on Tuesday. As if on cue, 2 uniformed officers and a man in a suit, likely the store owner, stepped onto the terrace. Jason's eyes went wide. He bolted. He actually tried. To run, shoving a bridesmaid out of the way, knocking over a table of champagne flutes. But he didn't get far. The security guard from the venue tackled him before he even reached the stairs. The chaos was absolute. Mom was screaming. Dad was clutching his chest, for real this time, or perhaps out of shame. The guests were filming. I watched for a moment, feeling a profound sense of detachment. It was like watching a tragedy on television. It was sad, yes, but it wasn't my tragedy anymore. I placed my empty glass on the table, adjusted my clutch, and walked past my sobbing mother and stunned father. "Goodbye," I said. And I walked out of the wedding, out of the vineyard, and back to my rental car. I didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal, as gravity tends to be. Jason was arrested and charged with grand larceny for the electronics theft. Because of his prior record, which was much more extensive than I had known, petty theft, vandalism, the judge wasn't lenient. He's currently serving 18 months. But the real punishment came from the loan shark. The foreclosure was aggressive. My parents were evicted from their home of 30 years less than 2 months after the wedding. They lost everything. The furniture, the memories, the garden Mom loved, all of it seized to pay off the debts Jason had accrued. They tried to sue Jason to get the deed reversed, claiming fraud. But because they had signed the documents willingly, even if they were misled about the purpose, it was a messy, expensive legal battle they couldn't afford. The house was sold at auction. As for my parents, I blocked their numbers the day I flew back to Seattle, but news travels. My cousin Jessica told me they are living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. Dad had to come out of retirement and is working as a greeter at a hardware store. Mom is cleaning houses, the very same job she used to look down on. They are alone, they have no golden child to worship, and they have no scapegoat to bleed. They are forced to live in the reality they created, day after bitter day. Jessica told me that Dad tries to tell anyone who will listen that his ungrateful daughter stole his fortune. But in a small town, people talk. The video of Jason trying to run from the police at the wedding went viral locally. Everyone knows the truth. They know Robert and Linda weren't victims of a cruel daughter. They were victims of their own blind favoritism. As for me, Seattle is gray, rainy, and beautiful. I used the equity from my house, the money they were so desperate to steal, to buy a small condo near the market. I spent the first month just sleeping. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for a crisis call. I wasn't bracing for a demand. I started therapy. My therapist says I have caregiver burnout and complex trauma. We're working on it. It's hard work, unraveling 30 years of conditioning. It's hard to learn that my worth isn't tied to how much I can endure. But last Sunday, I did something revolutionary. I woke up at noon. I made a pot of coffee. I sat on my balcony and watched the ferries cross the Sound. My phone didn't ring. No one demanded I set the table. No one critiqued my appearance. No one asked for money. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, strong, and just the way I liked it. I thought about that Sunday lunch. I thought about Dad saying, "Family helps family." He was right in a twisted way. I did help them. I helped them find the rock bottom they had been avoiding for decades. I helped them face the truth, and most importantly, I helped myself. I took another sip, listening to the rain tap against the glass. I was finally truly home.